Hi, welcome to Focus Talk. The Fast and Furious 9 actor John Cena apologized on Chinese social media network Weibo for calling Taiwan a country. Chinese netizens, however, are not satisfied with his apology, demanding that he say Taiwan is a part of China in Chinese. On the other hand, in his home country, Cena's apology also sets off a firestorm. Today, we invite Chris Fenton, former Hollywood executive and author of the book Feeding the Dragon, to come to our show again to talk about this incident. Hi, Chris. Great to see you.
Great to be on again, Jenny. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. So, John Cena's apology triggered strong reactions in U.S. Senator Tom Cotton tweeted, "Pathetic," and someone wrote, "Can someone please help John Cena locate his spine?" And here's another one that I really like. It says, "There goes John Cena, managing in just a few seconds to connect the question of Taiwanese autonomy to Hollywood greed and mainland Chinese authoritarianism." What was your reaction when you watched his apology video?
Well, I'm not close friends with John, but I do know him because I did produce a movie called Blockers with him, which was a tremendous success. I know him as an athlete for the WWE and also as a great and gifted actor and comedic actor, quite frankly, and also a really good person. He does a lot of charity work. Obviously, he served the country. So when I saw this, I felt really bad because it is something that obviously he did not want to walk right into, but boy, did he step into it. And what was even more interesting is the fact that out of all the actors I've worked with over the years, he's somebody that's actually really put a strong concerted effort into integrating himself into Chinese culture. And obviously the most tangible way to see that is the fact that he spoke Mandarin the other day, which is something new that I don't think a lot of people knew he was capable of doing. So the fact that he both did what he did when he knew as much about sort of the sensitivities between Taiwan and the U.S. and China, and then on top of it, did it with such a huge acumen and such a huge push to break himself into that market in such a large way over the last decade, I felt badly for him and I was quite shocked.
Honestly, I feel bad for him when I saw his apology video. I think he really likes China and Chinese culture and Chinese people. But this Taiwan thing is a party line. It's something the Communist Party trying to propagate and instill into people's minds. So I really feel bad for him. But do you think that he did it because his company ordered him to do it?
Well, first of all, yes. Well, to answer that question, that's hard to say. I can speculate the fact that if you look at contracts for actors, they're pretty plain speaking as far as what they request of the actors. Number one is they're supposed to go in and perform the service of being an actor in those help do any movie possible. The second thing is that they have to figure out how to place in their schedule the ability to go out and promote that movie in the best way possible. And one of the things you have to do when you promote the movie is obviously positively promote it. But if something goes awry or something goes negative against the movie that you can address and fix, you have to get out there and fix it. And that's a perfect example of what happened. He was out there promoting the film, and then he stepped in it a little bit, and now he has to fix it. And one of the big issues that we've seen, whether it's with Burberry or Hugo Boss or Nike or Adidas or Marriott or even the studios themselves, is trying to wade into what is appropriate for both markets, whether it's the U.S. and the West or China, are opposite contracted, sort of bifurcated themes. So if you're trying to do both, you're actually putting one foot in two different boats that are separating. And that's something that obviously he can't navigate, nor can any of these companies.
Yeah, I feel like he could even just remain silent because it gave people the impression that they're too eager to step in and apologize, even when the Chinese government did not say anything yet.
Well, if you look at sort of the strategy playbook for any company or any individual that steps into hot water with China, usually trying to stay quiet, and hope that the news cycle passes and that whatever that tempest in a teapot doesn't blow up into some sort of geopolitical issue. That's usually how it's played. That's usually the strategy used. And more often than not, it works. In this situation, he got out and really proactively tried to fix it, and it really bit him in the butt. Now, the question is, what does he do moving forward? Because remember, he has a very large constituency of fans on the athletic side because of his wrestling, which sometimes is more on the conservative side of the aisle. And then he has a huge fan base in Hollywood, which is more on the left side of the aisle. So in a way, he's alienated two sides of the United States of America and, quite frankly, the Western world. And he also didn't really do the job that he needed to do with the netizens and the fans in China. So what he might want to do is rethink this and say, well, how much is China worth to me versus the rest of the world? And I would argue that there's a real opportunity for him to take on this Muhammad Ali effect, where he actually leads, because he's in this situation, this effort to stop pandering to the CCP and to actually say enough is enough, and to see if he can get other filmmakers, other actors, other celebrities, other basketball players and athletes and other companies to follow him into this new path forward when it comes to the engagement with China.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a great advice. You should suggest this to him. Did you? Maybe you should.
Well, you know, it's fun. Yeah, well, I know a lot of the people around him, and I definitely have offered to help with some ideas in the same way that I've been working with a handful of brands and companies in that same respect. I mean, the engagement with China is something that I've argued cannot be completely decoupled. But we do have American principles and values and national security interests, and we have allies that we have to stand up for, like, for instance, Taiwan. By the way, Australia is another one that's out there sort of hanging on a limb. We saw what happened with Hong Kong. So we can't just pretend these things aren't happening. We have to be American. We have to be pro-West, and we have to do what's right and feels good. And part of that is actually standing up to this encroachment that's occurring from the Chinese Communist Party on all kinds of different things that we value as Americans and value as citizens of the West. And as we do that, we need to keep in mind that we don't want to go to war with China. I think that's bad for everyone. There is an equilibrium that can be had after we do a severe disruption and reset and rebalance of the relationship of China with us and the rest of our allies.
Yeah, I feel this incident triggered similar reaction like the NBA Murray incident. It's almost like a replay. Do you think this is another wake-up call to Americans that showed them how much the CCP controls Hollywood?
Look, you're speaking my language. I mean, when I think about the moment that woke me up to this idea that maybe full reckless, versions of capitalism to follow through on a globalist ideal was not in the best interests of America and our allies. That was that moment of the Daryl Morey tweet and the reaction over the following week that occurred all across the NBA with the players, with the executives, with the coaches, etc. That woke me up to the fact that there are real problems in the way we engage China, and I think it woke up a lot of others. I think this situation with John Cena, as I'm seeing from whether it's social media or the way the press is handling it, it's happening on the left, it's happening on the right, it's happening in between. People are starting to get very aware of this situation. And I think what's great about that is now there's going to be pressure both on the pocketbooks of the consumers to do what's right, which means that will extrapolate to the bottom line for these companies. But it will also put pressure on politicians and journalists to stay on this subject, to not get diffracted by all kinds of other news cycle topics. And it will also cause a push for people like John Cena to maybe say, hey, I'm going to take a stand. I want to lead by example. I'm going to get some of my peers and colleagues to join me and some of the companies that we work for, and we're going to push back.
Do you think the pressure will be strong enough that Hollywood will rethink its engagement with, or appeasement really, to China, to the CCP?
Well, I think there's a couple things happening. Number one is, and unfortunately, it's thanks to people like myself and others that were doing this over the last 20 years, we've really helped the film industry in China catch up to the United States, the American process of making films. And because of that, they are now making movies that are at the quality level almost of what Hollywood does. And they're catering directly to their consumer with plots and stories and characters that are much more relevant to their consumer base than, for instance, a typical Hollywood story. So we're losing market share in that market already. So the desperation that we have to keep growing in there is not even, in effect, a reality anymore. Number two is, yes, I do think there's enough encroachment that has gotten way too aggressive on free speech rights, on censorship, on things that are causing us to proactively censor things, to counter censor things after movies are done. And we're getting to that tipping point where enough is enough. And this John Cena example is something that really is an eye-opener and something that hopefully catalyzes a change.
There's one thing that came up recently, an article by a Hollywood reporter. I want to just quote this person.
Judd Apatow.
Yeah,
yes.
Judd Apatow. He said, instead of us doing business with China and that leading to China being more free, what has happened is that China has bought our silence with their money. What's your thought to that?
Well, I've been tweeting that out and running that quote quite a bit because, like I said, I worked with John Cena on this movie, but actually Leslie Mann, Judd Apatow's wife, was in this film too. So I got to know Judd from a distance through that also, and he's one of the more vocal, very A-list players in Hollywood that's speaking about this issue. And one of the reasons he can is because he tends to make comedies, and comedies don't really translate into China, so he doesn't quite have as much to sacrifice by talking about it, but it's fantastic that he's out there doing that. And 100%, they are buying our silence because we know how much money that market is worth. And if you go back to the John Cena example, for instance, that movie, Fast 9, is already, I think, at $170 million, which is almost, I think it's almost where Godzilla and King Kong got overall, and it's definitely the highest grossing movie of the year for Hollywood because of China. So you can see why he's taking that stance. Now, the other thing I was going to add, too, is that you bring up human rights and other issues. I mean, right now in Washington, D.C., we're seeing a battle royale between business lobby and national security issues. And along with those, you're seeing the business lobby butting heads with human rights issues and also freedom of speech issues, climate change issues, and various other things that we have real strong problems with when it comes to China. So it's going to be interesting to see whether the business lobby can continue at this course with such an extra amount of leverage over those other factors, or whether those other factors against business lobby is going to start to quiet the business lobby side of things.
Do you think Hollywood may lose more American market share in U.S. If more and more people start to get angry with Hollywood's approach?
Well, that's another thing that we haven't spoken about yet, and that's a great question. I mean, number one, we talked about market share being lost and sort of enough is enough red line that we're seeing. But the third thing is when consumers here start to retaliate against Hollywood and some of the players in Hollywood because of what they see as something that's pandering to a competitive nation or the competitive superpower. And what we're seeing also is something similar over the next, and it's less than 300 days now, which is the Beijing 2022 Olympics. We're going to start to see a lot of consumers question athletes and a lot of the companies that are supporting the athletes and the Olympics in China if they continue to move forward as planned. And that is going to be a delicate balancing act for chief financial officers to look at and say, hey, what's worth more, losing China or losing the rest of the world?
Yeah, is this such a big deal to lose the China market?
Well, right now, unfortunately, it is. You can pretty much go through any global company's books that has a business in China and realize the majority of their revenue growth, the majority of their profit or their EBITDA is growing thanks to the China market. So if you take that out of the equation, a lot of the projections that these publicly traded companies put out there that allow their stocks to trade on certain multiples suddenly vanish, and you'll see the market caps of these companies come down quite dramatically.
But isn't it because of pandemic?
Well, pandemic has obviously created all kinds of disruption, right? You have the technology disruption.
Yeah.
A lot of that has occurred. But you're seeing, obviously, an emergence of the China market come back much faster than other markets around the world. So there is that temporary sugar high that China has created. That's going to go away as everybody else sort of gets caught up to speed. But even taking COVID out of the equation, the growth of the China market, the size of the China market, the fact there's 1.4 billion people there, that is a continually expanding middle class with expendable income coming online, that's just too hard for companies to just wean off of right away. It's going to be a process. It's going to be a little disruptive. Investors and shareholders are going to have to give some leniency for C-suite executives to make the decisions to, for instance, move back supply chains to more expensive areas to manufacture, and also take stands on things that we don't agree with China and watch them retaliate against those goods and services, or even the consumers retaliate against those goods and services that create bottom line issues. Now, keep in mind the other thing, too, that's really interesting about the Chinese Communist Party is that they work in very quiet ways, right? Like I sometimes compare it to you're sitting back in a bar stool and you almost fall over, but you don't quite. And it's that weird feeling you have. A lot of times the retaliation that the Chinese Communist Party gives towards a company or a particular individual is not a direct one, not one that you know for sure is a punishment, but they might leak out bad sentiment through the netizens and through the populace there to essentially retaliate without actually fully retaliating in a perfectly tangible way.
Actually, you were quoted in this Hollywood Reporter article. Disney should have the ability to say, we don't stand for what's happening in Xinjiang province as a company. You said that in our program last time as well. So you said they should be able to make that statement without fearing that their theme park's going to be shut down or they're never going to be allowed to exploit their IP in that market again. But then the article says how that ideal can be realized in a global industry of ruthless realpolitik is anything but clear. So what do you say to that?
Well, number one is the fact that Hollywood Reporter wrote that 6-page expose, Tatiana Siegel and Patrick Bresky, I commend them, give them hats off, because I know personally 2 major publications that I worked with to do a similar piece. When they got close to finishing them, they ended up getting killed before they were published. So it's a very, very delicate and sensitive issue to start talking about this stuff publicly, and journalists are put in a very difficult position with editors and the investors in these publications as to whether they can actually put these stories into print. So hats off to Hollywood Reporter. Secondly, what I was stating there is the fact that Disney should have had the right to say what they wanted to say as a criticism towards the Xinjiang province atrocities and what's happening to Uyghurs, and also apologize for the lack of oversight that they had in regards to thanking government officials that should have never been thanked in the end credits. What I'm not advocating is the fact, and of course at some point we would love to see it happen, but they don't need to say that apology on the ground in China, right? We censor content, we censor speech, we censor all kinds of marketing, promotional ways and strategies for various markets around the world based on cultural aspects. But what I didn't want to see was Disney, which is headquartered in Burbank, California, not be able to essentially apologize for what happened and say they don't condone as a company what's going on in Xinjiang province. That should be their American right, and that should be something that they're allowed to do to placate politicians, leadership here, journalists, and the consumers around the world that actually care about this issue, which is everybody outside of China, right? So that's something I thought should have been able to happen. And quite frankly, the Chinese Communist Party, in a perfect world, and in a world pre where we are with them today, would have and should have allowed that. Why? Because they have a firewall that would prevent that type of statement being heard by the majority of Chinese people. So the Chinese Communist Party gets to censor what they want for their own people. But what happened is they also got to censor what Disney could say to people around the world, the stuff that we wanted Disney to say as a pillar of free speech, as an iconic sort of emblem of what it is to be creative and free of individual thought. They stifled their own speech in order to placate the CCP, not just inside China, but throughout the world.
So you're right. They should have the right to not having to apologize, but the CCP does not allow or does not give that right. So
right.
I think. Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to add is you added that last sentence that was in that paragraph, which says, well, how do we let them do what they should do? And the answer to that, which wasn't in that piece, is we need to back them as a country, as the leaders of this country, the Washington, D.C., as the partners of these studios, as the filmmakers, as the actors, as the other partners around the Hollywood ecosystem, whether it's the IMAXs or the Mattels or the Hasbros, et cetera. And then on top of it, a multilateral approach on this from other countries that are our allies. And when Disney says what we want them to say, and this Chinese Communist Party inevitably punishes them somehow, they shut down their theme park, they ban their movies, that solidarity of all those entities needs to back Disney and say, you know what, that is wrong, and we are going to stop doing business with you until you right it. And that kind of leverage I've seen work in deals with China. I've seen it work in various situations. The Chinese will back off if there is a leveraged approach to anything in something that's some sort of transaction. And that is what this is. It's a transaction of rights. And we want them back. And we can create the leverage to get that, and they will retreat. And that's what we need to do. I'm not asking to go to war. I'm not asking to go fix what's happening in Xinjiang province on behalf of Disney. They can't fix it, but they can at least bring to light what is going on over there so that the entities that can fix those atrocities and the pressure that can come from the UN and from various other nations around the world to fix it can start to happen. But we can't even think about fixing any of these problems if we're not allowed to talk about them.
Yeah, entities or industries, they're actually composed of individuals. So I think ultimately it comes down to each individual. You have to choose between conscience and money. Do you want the money or do you want your dignity? Want to hold on to the basic values? What do you think?
Well, it's a fantastic point, and it's something I bring up, and I use the word patriot, which has been commandeered by one side of the aisle, and people get shut off to the idea, but I like this idea of patriotism before capitalism. I'm a big free market capitalist. I've made, a good career out of it. But there's a certain amount of recklessness that if it's at the detriment of the foundation of the nation that allows you to have free market capitalism, you can't do that, right? Because without a strong nation, whether it's the United States, whether it's Taiwan, whether it's, a European country, without that strong foundation, you cannot have free markets. You cannot have capitalism. You can't have rules of law. So you need to make sure you protect the fundamentals in order to procure and start to do business in a fully capitalistic way. So this reckless abandonment that we've had in the engagement with China that has been very pro-business lobby, very pro-reckless capitalism has been, to the detriment of the foundation of what we are as a country and what some of the other allies that are engaged in this same kind of behavior are also experiencing with the foundation of their own countries. So we need to protect that first. And then let's be free market capitalists. That's exactly what Europe did after they reset the relationship with the United States in the early 1800s. And it's the same way we can be with China, but we need to properly address it, fix it, and we need to do it fast because we're running out of time.
How can we encourage more courageous people to stand up? Because if everyone is waiting for everyone else, nothing will happen. So someone has to step up first. Someone has to be able to be courageous and have the conscience and to start to say and do things, just like you did, like what you've been doing.
Yeah, well, sometimes it takes like a really strong aha moment where you go, well, wait a minute, I've done a lot of things wrong. I want to try to fix that. But on top of it, it could come from something as strangely I guess serendipitous, but also unfortunate, like what happened to John Cena. There's somebody with a huge podium, a big platform already, and it's almost like he fell into a no-win situation. There is no right thing he can do right now if he wants to work in China and work in the United States. Somehow he's going to have to take a stand, and that's going to work against him somewhere. So I almost say, hey, you have nothing to lose, but you had a massive, massive platform to work off of. Why not do the right thing, which seems maybe so wrong right now in regards to making great capitalistic sort of decisions on a short-term basis, but I can almost guarantee in the long term, he's going to be worth a lot more money and be a lot more revered if he actually takes the stand and leads others to do the same.
Are you hopeful with this, things happening like the Hollywood Reporter article and other things? Are you hopeful that Hollywood will have more spine when dealing with CCP? For example, with this Chloe Zhao movie, right? He's directing this huge Marvel movie. I heard someone said they released the trailer, but the trailer doesn't have her name.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a little. I've seen that a bunch too. That it's a little misguided because typically Marvel is bigger than the filmmakers themselves and bigger than the actors themselves. So they tend not to have to market Marvel movies based on who directs them or who stars in them. Marvel is the star. So I'm not reading into that much, but Chloe has not been out there talking about the film, and obviously Disney is trying to figure out how to navigate China on this. And there's so much at stake for Disney to figure this out. And in a perfect world, I would love to see an association like the Motion Picture Association, which is led by Charles Rivkin, if they could somehow navigate this on behalf of the studios and essentially rally the studios around this idea that, hey, let's be all in this together. We're all sort of becoming lone wolves in dealing with China. We're all getting caught in the wrong sort of political crossfire, and then we're trying to handle it ourselves. Like if we do it together, we can actually maybe get them to push back a bit and put a little semblance of like a real strong trade relationship in line, rather than having something that every minute you're worried about. Did somebody call some Taiwan a nation by accident in some small obscure article or interview? And look at even the Chloe Zhao thing. That was an article in a really small magazine that was out there in 2013. And what's even worse about that is that apparently, according to the Hollywood Reporter article, Disney was so upset about it, they actually called the journalists, the platform, to remove that quote, which is super un-American. It's not an American thing to do. I mean, that's not a freedom of the press move, and it's just sort of a bummer that we've gotten to this point.
Yeah, I know. So like the senator said, it's really pathetic. So what do you think Congress could do on this end?
Well, we do need to lead by example. I mean, one of the things that's a real problem is our senators or House members getting up on a platform and calling out LeBron James or calling out John Cena or calling out Disney or whatever it is, because they don't have as much to lose in the market or have anything to lose in the market, and the people they're calling out do. So there needs to be skin in the game in order to approach this the right way. I would like to see leadership start to back this idea that here are the ground rules in regards to how you engage with China, and you have to follow them. And if you don't follow them appropriately, then there'll be repercussions, because we need to all be in this together. And I'm still saying we stay democratic and free market about it, but we also stay patriotic too. And we do that with various things that are considered national security interests, where you just can't be reckless with capitalism and, trade technology or different, sort of satellite parts with countries that have a sort of a nefarious alignment with us. So it's important that we put our nation first. And when somebody gets into trouble for doing something that's completely American, like criticizing something, apologizing for something that we all feel is the appropriate way to move forward, if there is retaliation, the government, Congress, has to stand behind these companies and stand behind these industries and stand behind these individuals and say to China, no, that is not the way that it works. You cannot punish that person for exercising their free speech rights, and here are the ramifications for doing that until you fix it.
Yeah, let's hope that would wake up more people and things will go down to a more positive direction.
Yeah, I think, since we're coming towards the end of this interview, I want to make sure that I put out there that I am hopeful. I'm hopeful, number one, because we have a real rival out there, which is this new superpower called China, and they are rising quickly, and they're a true strategic competitor of the United States of America. We don't want to go to war with them. We don't want to start a Cold War with them, but they are not going anywhere, and they're going to be around for a long time and continue to rise. And I hope that that rivalry causes the United States of America and our allied nations to rise up to be the best they can be, number one. And number two, the common challenge unites very bifurcated parts of our citizenry, where our left and our right can actually come together on common interests like national and economic security, like human rights, like freedom of speech, like climate change, and actually agree to have a unification when it comes to China. We can have all the other cultural warfare and all the other things we don't agree on happen outside of that common challenge, but that common challenge should bond us and make us a better nation in the process. And I think ultimately, if we address this problem and do it in a relative short amount of time, we'll ultimately have a much better relationship with the superpower on the other side of the Pacific.
Really, thank you so much, Chris, for coming to our show again. At least we're seeing more and more people raising their voices on this issue. So I think your efforts pay off.
Yeah, I think they're paying off, and I really thank you for giving me the platform. If anybody wants to follow me on Twitter, I'm at the Dragon Feeder, and I hope they like my book, and I hope they join the cause and help getting their friends and their family into this. And I think we can do this, but we just all need to want to, and we need to come together on it. And thank you. Always honored and humbled to be on the show.
Great. Is your book on Amazon already?
Yes, it's on Amazon. It's Barnes & Noble. But yes, you can get it on Amazon, or you can go to feedingthedragonbook.com.
Cool. Thank you, Chris. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. 谢谢再见.
谢谢. Bye. Well, thank you everyone for watching Focus Talk. We'll see you next time.